to actually press record, which I just did. And we'll have it up on YouTube, on our YouTube channel next week. Couple other things. This is a Zoom webinar format. This is a little bit different than a Zoom meeting that you might be used to. So we can't see the attendees. Only the panelists will be visible to you. So that's sort of how this works. So sorry if you spent a lot of time touching up your appearance for this event, but we can't actually see you. And one of the things that's different from a Zoom meeting is you'll see that there's a Q&A box on your screen. That's where you should enter questions for our panelists. We've actually turned these on so that everybody can see the questions that are asked, all the attendees, so you can see if a question's already been asked. And so please type those in during the presentations, and then we'll get to them at the conclusion of each presentation. There is also a chat box, and so you're welcome to post things if you want to send something out to all attendees, but just make sure you can select either panelists, that's how it defaults to, those are just the speakers tonight, or you can send it to all people. So just make sure you're sending it to the right place if you do use that chat function. As we said, we've got a busy agenda. And Mark just ran through it quickly. So we've got Tom Brule and Jennifer Fish from DCR, Pat Conlon and Marianne Pichet from Mass Wildlife. A special added guest that wasn't on the agenda that was made public is Dan Wright, who's going to share some information, interesting information about bat research and the connection to young forest habitat. Bob Purcell from NEF, and then I'll end things up by talking about legislative updates and a few other quick things at the end. So without further ado, since we're on a tight schedule here, I want to ask Tom Brule, who's relatively newly appointed to DCR, but I'm sure many of you know him, a very well-known forester. In fact, he was my forester when I was running a summer camp in the Berkshires about 20 years ago, which is how I first got interested in forest management. So I'll turn things over to Tom to take us through his presentation. Tom?
Chris, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm going to try to put my PowerPoint. If I fail, it'll be my second failure today. This is one of the first things I tried to learn is how to do PowerPoint, once on Teams and now on Zoom. Okay, so share screen. Oh, there it is right there. Double click. Tell me if you can see it.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, now I got to go to, whoops. Oh, how do I get rid of that screen?
You would just go to, just click the X at the top right. Yeah.
Top right. No, I don't want to go to that. I want to go to, oops. I want to get rid of this black screen.
Yeah, you would just go to slideshow and start your presentation.
Oh, this has a slideshow. I don't see slideshow anyway. Let's go back to this. I can't see it. Let's pull it down. Shoot. Anyway, you can see the screen. See, I can't get to it. You are screen sharing. Let's get rid of that. I can't get rid of it. There it is. Okay, that's out of the way. All right, there you go. Okay, yeah. So I'm Tom Brule. I've been recently hired by the Department of Conservation Recreation as the head forester for the management program, if you will. There's my contact information. I've only been on board about a month, so I'm still really just going through orientation, meeting with all the foresters, and they are great people. So basically, DCR manages 314,000 acres. I'm sure you've seen, this before, and why we do it and how we do it. We have 8 district foresters, throughout the Commonwealth, 13 counties, And you can see they're more clustered towards the western end of the state because that's where most of the holdings are. There's a little brief history on when the DCR was formed, basically back in the days of the Metropolitan Park Commission in 1892. DCR has approximately, they have 3 designations of their forests, as you all know, between 70 and 90,000 of parklands, 90 to 120 in reserves, and the active woodlands that we manage about 100 to 150,000 acres. We have 8 full-time foresters, 7 seasonal employees. They do things like boundaries, timber management, planning, wildlife habitat management, continuing forest inventory, and post-management inventory, which is all really good. And the other person that we have, who is a tremendous asset, is Bill Van Doren, who does a lot of the CFI type work and a lot of the other database stuff for carbon, et cetera. So what's going to be going on with me for the next few months? We're going to be reviewing and going over the Massachusetts State Forest Action Plan. I just started reading it a week or 2 ago, as well as the landscape designation. I don't think you're going to see any changes with regards to acreages or whatever. You may see some tweaks or something, but I don't think you're going to see anything earth-shattering there. One thing that we have recently formed is a partnership with Mass Wildlife. So we're hoping we're going to be doing mutual work with Mass Wildlife, maybe some barrens restoration, and they're going to be doing some other type of forestry work that we'll be able to help them with. There's a real need to create a balance of forest stage structures across the state. We're lopsided to one side, and so what we're trying to figure out is how can we create that balance. How do we work with that balance for habitat, but also for forest resiliency, from the effects of climate change. So those are the things that I'm going to be doing, over the next few months, with DCR. There's some of the things that we're just trying to be able to figure out. Massachusetts, there's so much that people want, benefits of managed forest, and we're going to be weighing out the benefits of unmanaged forest, and where do they all fit? How do they all fit on, DCR properties, and how do we make everybody happy? Obviously, we're never going to make everybody happy, but we're going to try to do, the best that we can. And basically, in closing, the challenges that we see, as you all know, the number one challenge is public perception. We know we need a balance of 4 stage classes. Some folks want to see us cut everything, and some folks want to see us cut nothing. But the answer is somewhere in the middle. Some of the other issues, as you all know, we have our forest health with invasives and with invasive insects that are causing harm, like emerald ash borer, woolly adelgid, et cetera. Another huge challenge is going to be markets, particularly for low quality material. But we're hopeful that, Neff's got that great study with cross-laminated timbers, and hopefully we could do something with pulp and, small scale biomass. And of course, the challenge of climate change is going to be another issue that we're going to face, but I think in the end we'll be all right. And that's pretty much everything that I have. So I'll open it to questions.
Yeah, folks, if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A box. Not seeing anything there yet. Give folks just another minute or two if you've got any questions for Tom. And
there's nothing earth-shattering going on yet. I just got here. Janet Sinclair, how would these here interact with small-scale biomass? How would we interact with small-scale biomass? I don't know if we would interact with small-scale biomass, but our foresters manage our land, and so we need markets for low-quality and high-quality timber. Keith Ross. Hi, Keith.
And folks, just a reminder, put your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat. So with the question from Laura, it says, Tom, can you share more about the landscape
Oh yeah, the
designation?
landscape, I don't really know anything more, Laura, just that I don't see anything earth shattering happening, like it's all gonna be reserves or it's all gonna be woodlands or anything like that. I just think it needs to be reviewed. It's gonna be 10 years, and I think, they're just gonna look at it and see, what worked, what didn't work, those kinds of things. Nothing earth shattering is gonna happen from my perspective. Tom Farrell, question about partnership with Mass Wildlife. Is it a new relationship? Not really. We've already been doing some Pine Barrens work down on the Cape, Miles Standish, and on the vineyard. We hope to do some. The Montague Plains DCR has a small ownership down there, so we're going to be doing some more Pine Barrens restoration work with those folks. So, is it new? No, but I think we're going to be working more together about creating a balance of 4 stage classes for wildlife. Am I promoting biomass? I'm not promoting anything. I'm just saying we need markets. Who's Jim? Go get him.
Great. Well, I think that's unless anyone has any further questions.
What relationship does DCR have with neighboring state forests? There is an association of state foresters that I'm supposed to represent, but I've only been here 30 days, so I haven't really met with any of those folks. So I don't know any of the details on how we interact with them, but I'm sure I will find out.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Tom. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'll be on for 2 hours.
All right. Yeah, folks, anytime you want to type questions in the Q&A box, you can do so. Even if a panelist is gone, maybe they could type an answer into the Q&A box for you. So great. So up next, from DCR, we have Jennifer Fish, who works in the service forestry, director of the service forestry, and which is working with private landowners and overseeing their forest management projects. So I'll turn things over to Jennifer.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for coming inside on this beautiful day. Share my screen. Can everybody see my screen?
We can, yes.
Okay, great. Pull something in my way. So thanks for having me. First announcement that I would like to make, just because I missed the annual meeting and have not been with this group in a while, is I think many people are aware that Joe Perry retired in the last year, and he did receive the Howard Mason Award, I know, at the annual meeting, and I wanted to thank the group for that, for recognizing all the great work that he did for, geez, his 40, I think it was 42-year career. So we have hired his replacement. His name is Jim Rossman. A number of you who've been around for a while may remember Jim. He started out as a service forester a number of years ago, and then went to work for Coit Bay for a while, and is wanting to get back to forestry and potentially end his career where he began as a service forester. So he has been with us now for 2 months maybe, and I've got to say, in this time of COVID and difficulty getting into offices and interacting, it has been a blessing to have someone new to the program who also knows the program. And then moving on with some program updates. Get my slide to advance. Move something out of the way. Okay. Wanted to give everyone an update with our Foresters for the Birds program. Noticed that we were heavy to wildlife in this meeting, so thought I would add in what Service Forestry is doing in the wildlife aspect. We started this program, we borrowed it from Vermont in 2015 with a pilot program. We have been training foresters ever since, and it is slowly picking up steam. Get more plans every year. In fiscal 2020, we were up to 95. This year, I'm certain we're going to break 100, and that will bring us roughly half of all stewardship plans that get prepared now have a bird habitat assessment as part of them. So wanted to say thank you to everyone for your hard work learning this program, and to those plan writers for bringing great habitat to landowners. As part of this, we are working with Mass Audubon to monitor some of the properties that have had management work done on them. We want to assure landowners and the public that what we're saying is going to happen with regards to bird response to management is happening. So in the 2018 breeding season, Mass Wildlife looked at some of the early successional habitat that was created as part of the Foresters for the Birds program. And they found a threshold response in the richness of birds that rely on young forest habitat in clear cuts that were 3 acres in size. So that doesn't mean that these birds aren't present in smaller acreage, but they reach, you're on a pretty steep curve in terms of the species richness. And then once you reach 3 acres, it does continue to increase, but at a lesser rate. It goes well with, I think our publications put out a minimum of 2.5 acres. So that roughly correlates to that. And in the 2019 to 2020 breeding seasons, they looked at what we call low and moderate intensity harvesting. So this is small group selections, thinning, shelter woods, expanding gap, and irregular shelter woods. And the early results is they are finding that all forest birds that require interior forest habitat, closed canopy, are retained, maybe in lesser numbers, but they are retained, and that they are seeing a benefit to target birds. And those target birds being things like veery, black-throated blue, which like a canopy that has some openings in it, so that there's more of a mid-story and a shrub layer. And then go through real quickly, I just wanted to let people know that we have a story map up for Foresters for the Birds. This is a chance for people to see virtually different properties and to go visit them. So an example is the Feldman's property in Athol. You can read about what they've done, you can read about their interests, and you can go visit the property. So they have done some low intensity management. This is working from existing storm damage. And it's interesting that the landowner, Susie Feldman, talks about her struggles with forest management and how she's come to understand that there can be some benefits to wildlife. And they've done some high intensity management through NRCS. They did a 10-acre harvest for early successional species. We go through the types of birds that we expect will benefit from these management practices. And then we tell people how they can get started if they're interested in the program. Something I wanted to make note of as it's management plan season. So in the past, stewardship plans have always incorporated what we've called the boilerplate section. And just wanted to let people know, reiterate that You're welcome to put the boilerplate in if you so choose, but you don't have to. We put together, with the help of Northern Woodlands Magazine, these 3 publications that cover the boilerplate information, and that's really in this Caring for Your Woods. And that's thinking about all of those ecological aspects of your property. We included this a starting point to help landowners think about what a forest management plan is, what a forester is, what Chapter 61 is, so that they have a better idea before they have their plan written. And then the last publication helps the landowner start to think about the actual management side of things. And those are available on the web here, and they are available from any DCR office. And then this, as you can see, is still in markup, but we have a landowner goals booklet that we're putting together. Discovered in talking to landowners that they don't really understand what it means when they're checking a goal as high in a management plan. So we're putting together another booklet in the series, Landowner Goals, talks about how to start thinking about goals, how to talk to your forester about your goals, and then helps people think about their interest type or personality type and some of the goals that might be under what they're interested in. And then it gets deeper into each of those interests, and then some questions that you can ask your forester. We also have interviews with landowners that fit each of these interest types, and that should be coming out within the next 6 weeks. Some next steps to forest stewardship. We're working on a survey to landowners and to foresters to help us with how we're delivering the program. One of the things we're really interested in is online content. There are many websites where you can get information about stewardship and forestry, and we're trying to figure out, is Mass Woods the best, or is the DCR website the best, where state and private information is best housed. We are looking to take the stewardship application and make it an online application. And then we'd like to start looking into some barriers for implementation. And then climate forestry. This is the hot button topic. It's coming up more and more in more conversations with more different partners. So we are, like we did with Foresters for the Birds, we're revamping the stewardship plan so that it can have a climate focus. And that's looking at resilience, adaptation, and carbon. We are looking at traditional carbon markets for municipal landowners because they're the ones that own enough land to be able to join these traditional carbon markets. And we're interested in exploring BMPs, timber harvesting in the changing climate. So again, we're putting out another booklet. This one is adapting to changing conditions. It is a call to action for landowners. Action checklist. It can be as simple as keeping forest land in forest use to getting ready for change, preparing for big weather events, responding quickly, etc. And here are just actions to build resilience. So we're trying to be very action oriented. We're working with NIACS on this and Northern Woodlands on this publication, and hope to have this one out by the end of the fiscal year. As part of that, we're taking a deeper dive into carbon and doing that one as a separate booklet. This one is focused on landowners. So it's helping landowners understand the importance of having a carbon objective and how carbon objectives fit into forest management. Going through some basic examples, trying to use photos to easily describe what we mean by live above ground carbon, live below ground carbon, etc. want to clarify what sequestering is versus storing. Always talking about balancing multiple goals. And then of real importance to me is creating this understanding that one of the primary importance of reducing vulnerabilities in our forests, because if we're losing a lot of trees to mortality, or if the forest is being dominated by diseased beech, etc., it gets back to you can't store lots of carbon if you're losing lots of carbon. So really thinking about how we can reduce these vulnerabilities, and then trying to simplify. Carbon is confusing to the best of us, so trying to help landowners understand that. And then from the forester side of things, we're going to be putting together a guide to writing climate plans. Because this is such a hot button topic and lots of folks are trying to think about management for carbon, management for resilience, management for adaptation, we want these sections or the management practices to be as tailored for different programs as they come online, so that your clients, your landowners will be ready to take advantage of these available programs. We're working on some field data sheets to make it easy to do, and we plan on doing trainings next fiscal year. A quick aside to this is we are not intending for these plans to be the level of inventory to jump into a carbon market, but we are talking to people about how you can do a carbon inventory for those who are interested. Carbon markets focused on municipalities. We do have a publication that we're working on with Mass Audubon that again should be coming out pretty soon. Uses real life examples, talks about what makes a successful carbon project, and tries to help a municipality with the decision making as to whether they would want to move forward with this. And then some of you may have heard we did a survey of licensed timber harvesters. Just wanted to put up a few quick results from that survey. One of the surprising responses to me is that 59% of respondents still say they used hand chop and skid, 41% using a mechanized system. My gut reaction is we had gone further to mechanization than that, so that was of interest to me. Also of interest is that most respondents said that they got most of their income from logging, over 75%, and yet the average amount of time someone spends logging is only 33 weeks, which is distressing to me and not too surprising. Mechanized folks average more time in the woods. And then in terms of climate impacts, obviously our winters are what are changing the most. We can't count on the snowfall, can't count on the frozen conditions, and yet that's when loggers say they count on winter for the most of their volume. So again, that's something to keep in mind and to help where we can. When asked about issues that they're facing, at the top are economic factors, but at the very top is weather conditions. And then operational factors kind of fall in the mid-range, and social factors toward the bottom. So with weather conditions being high, that's something where we can certainly try to help out with BMPs. And then finally, just wanted to let people know that we are working on a BMP video series. We will use this for logger training, and it will also be available for conservation commissions, other interested parties, so that they understand what a landing is, what makes a good landing. We're starting with landings and working our way back into the property, so we'll eventually get to skid roads and crossings, etc. So just wanted to let people know what we were working on. And that's mine in a nutshell. So happy to take questions.
Okay, so Jennifer, you can look at the Q&A box. I can read them out to you, or you can just
I
look
can
at them yourself.
start reading them out until I get my screen back to where I can see Q&A.
Okay. Do the bird-related clear cuts maintain species improvements over time, or do you need to clear cut them again?
Yeah, so clear cuts are very ephemeral in terms of their effect on wildlife. So their beneficial nature to young forest birds. Many birds don't start moving in until a year to 3 after, and by 15 to 20 years after, you're losing the beneficial effect. So then it's time to make a choice as to whether you want to let the forest continue to grow where you've cut it, or if you want to start succession over again.
How is volume harvested per system?
Oh, in terms of the survey, I'd have to look back at the survey. It was, I mean, logically, there is more volume coming out with the mechanized systems, but I can't remember the ratio offhand. We are coming out with a public document that summarizes the survey. We're still working on just some of the photos and the finished work, so I can make that available to everyone when we're finished.
Okay, there's a question about if the survey is available, and I saw that it is on the NEF website. In fact,
Okay, so they have
we'll
put it up. Okay,
yeah, so we'll put it in our. I downloaded a copy of it, and we'll put it in
Great.
our a link in our forest.
I was
update
thinking
next
we were
month.
still going to change some photos, but all the information's the same, even if we do change photos.
Is DCR developing a timber bridge loan program?
So we have, I was not thinking of a timber bridge loan program as much as I was thinking of timber mats. So where I was coming from is about the freeze thaw that we're getting in the winters and the difficulties of getting a road to freeze in and stay frozen. So I was thinking much more in the timber mat perspective, and being able to just mat those low areas, you know, places where there are seeps, etc. So we have been doing, we asked questions about it in the survey. We got very positive responses, started doing some back of the napkin calculations, and the way I'm thinking about it in terms of not having so much cost put on the industry is trying to come up with state funds or grant money, etc., to be able to buy 3 years worth of mats and then be able to maintain that program through some sort of fee. And so being able to come up with that initial capital is going to be difficult, but we're going to keep researching it and hope we can get there.
There's a question about education for foresters about to access PPP loans. My only question about that is I'm not sure if you can still apply.
We
I
can
think
still
they're,
do, right,
yeah.
right. I don't think that we still can. We are doing a second round of survey questions to timber harvesters, and we are asking if they can, you know, use some help if they're interested in help with marketing or business or those kinds of things.
And Bob Purcell, if there's something you wanted to say about that, feel free.
Yeah, hit the wrong button, but I wanted to say something anyway. Yeah, I just learned the other day that they've closed the PPP loans, at least for now. There may be some other money sloshing around, but it looks like we're about at the end of that.
But that was my suspicion. Then final question, other publications you mentioned, Jennifer, available online or will be available online?
So everything I mentioned this evening will be available online. Some of them, so anything Foresters for the Birds related is currently online. The 3 publications, the that I said took the place of the boilerplate. Those are available. The ones I mentioned later in my talk are not yet available, but will be.
Great, and there's a suggestion you might talk to power companies about getting used mats.
Yes, and I did, in thinking about how to ramp up the initial inventory, I was thinking of starting with some used mats to keep the cost down. And then eventually, because those won't last as long, knowing that, kind of pulling them out of the inventory after a couple of years. But yes, I did know that there were some available.
Great, well, thanks so much for your
Sure.
presentation and sharing all this stuff. We'll look forward to seeing these publications when they come out, and we'll of course promote them out to our members in the Forest Update e-newsletter.
All right, sounds
They're
good.
released. Our next presentation is from Mass Wildlife. As you may remember, we announced a collaborative regional conservation partnership program with Mass Wildlife. And so I believe Pat Conlon from Mass Wildlife is going to be discussing that grant program.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Let me get this fired up. All right. So thank you everyone for tuning in. And thank you MFA for giving us the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Pat Conlon, and I am a private lands habitat biologist for Mass Wildlife. Tonight, I am presenting some details about a new NRCS program that offers both technical and financial assistance to private forest landowners and managers in Massachusetts. Mary Ann Pichet and I are available to provide recommendations to landowners on how they can protect, improve, or restore habitat on their land. We can also help landowners access funding to complete that recommended work by assisting with application writing. So the Massachusetts Collaborative for Private Forest Lands is a regional conservation partnership program, RCPP, administered by NRCS. The program provides a dedicated pool of funding for wildlife habitat planning and implementation. Habitat biologists with Mass Wildlife are here to assist landowners and managers in Massachusetts include habitat planning and their property goals that align with our state wildlife action plan, which is available on our state website. The same NRCS practices that are commonly used for forest and habitat management are available through this program to promote rare and declining species. The program has $1.5 million allocated to fund projects that will promote rare and declining species while addressing forest health concerns like invasive species, reduced vegetative diversity, and structural complexity. Assistance is limited to Massachusetts through September 2023. So it's the clock's ticking on this, and we have a lot of money to spend. So don't be shy about coming forward with a project. The goals here for the RCPP are to increase the quality and availability of suitable habitat for state wildlife action plan species, create more opportunities for landowners to access funds to complete quality habitat projects through planning assistance to fund work that otherwise would be a cost to the landowner, and create more resilient forest through the preservation of declining species and inclusion of forest structures lacking in many second growth stands. The eligibility for this program is very similar to general EQIP, the normal NRCS programs that people apply for. If you're interested in learning more, please contact either Mary Ann or me. Our information will be on the final slide. And you may remember this map from the annual meeting in 2020. We've received a lot of interest in how we put this together. And you can see the focal map is pretty broad, and it consists of two distinct polygons, focal area 1 and 2 in red and green respectively. And break this apart and see what the individual components of these focal areas are. So focal area 1 consists of known locations identified by our natural heritage and endangered species biologists as high priority. Active management in these places can facilitate the natural disturbance regime that listed species have adapted to thrive in. Unique natural communities such as ridgetop heathlands are also included in this mapping. And then when we overlay priority 2, we can see these polygons. They were identified through analysis done by the Wildlife Management Institute, WMI, Mass Audubon, and Mass Wildlife. These areas also include buffers around identified natural communities highlighted in Focal Area 1. The mapping helps us tailor our management recommendations for the species most likely to benefit. Active management will also have additional value by providing important breeding and foraging habitat for a wide suite of generalist species in addition to obligates. It's also worth noting that funding for projects is not limited to early successional work. We will help you prepare applications for a wide array of activities ranging from apple tree release to snag recruitment. And here's a list of some of the species, actually all of the species, we'll go through a few slides, that were included in this mapping analysis from Heritage. So if you scroll through it, you'll notice amphibians, birds, insects, and plants. And then the MISA status, Massachusetts Endangered Species Act. You'll see SC is special concerned, T is threatened, and E is endangered. And here's some more. You can scroll through that. And we can see our natural communities listed here too. And although there's a lot of funding available in this particular pool, it's not the only game in town. And the best fit is really dependent on the landowner and the particular goal that you have on that piece of property. For example, our Mass Wildlife Habitat Grant is open to municipalities, but anything through NRCS is not. Many landowners have successfully utilized different sources of funding on the same property to build on previous work, and it's something that we promote and encourage. All right, and yeah, so this was short and sweet. A lot of recapping from the announcement at the annual meeting, but there's my my contact info. If you have more questions, don't hesitate to reach out. This is what I do day in and day out. I'm happy to meet up on site and walk around, no matter what part of the planning process you're on. I'm happy to work with Heritage on behalf of you and work with getting permitting through and make sure that we're doing the right thing with that investment of time. And that's what I have.
Great. There's some questions coming in. So
Okay.
how did you map the rough grouse and woodcock?
So the woodcock was done by the by WMI, and that was a relic from the Young Forest RCPP that included all the New England states and New York. And not exactly sure what went into all that analysis. It was broken into uplands and bottomland habitats. And then we figured our rough grouse habitat priority based on the Breeding Bird Atlas 2 that Mass Audubon published. And we looked at areas of known occurrences and we highlighted those areas and then put a buffer around those known locations because of the behavior of ruffed grouse. They're more likely to disperse on land rather than fly great distances like some other species. So that was the thinking along those lines. But really, when it comes down to it, you can only get so much resolution from your computer once you're on the site and you see what you're dealing with, what the landowner's concerns are, what the limitations are of the site. Then you quickly whittle down what's possible and what's worth the investment, and then seeing how it meshes into their goals aside from habitat as well. So it's very much an individual case by case basis.
Great. And then, so is this funding part of NRCS current funding or is it additional funding?
This is additional funding. So essentially there was an application into NRCS to request more farm bill allocation for this type of work. So everything that's in normal equip is still there. This is additional. And so the only way that you can access that funding is by contacting either Mary Ann or I and going through that planning process to make sure that we're aligning with our state wildlife action plan. And we interact internally with our biologists and endangered species experts to make sure that we're really doing everything right.
Great. And there's another question there. I don't know if you can see that one, Pat.
Yeah, I just pulled this up, so I'm reading it. How visible is this to the landowner? In other words, is it a partial cost share? So, yeah, this is just like NRCS, except I'm going to come out and I'm going to assist from the planning stages. If you don't have a management plan, I can hook you up with the paperwork to apply for funding to get that first one written. If you have trouble finding foresters, I will get you a list and you can start calling people up. If you have a management plan and the forester is savvy with NRCS and wrote specific things into the plan, we can start from that point. But yeah, usually I get two type of phone calls. One is, hey, I'm interested in habitat. Tell me what I have. And I go out there and I do an inventory and walk around and play naturalist. And that's fun and provide a decent plan that kind of breaks our state wildlife action plan and makes it very personalized for that property to see what's on the menu for all sorts of different things that they can do. And then, it's a choice on their part whether or not they engage in any of that. But it's always there as a reference material that they can have next to their forest management plan or whenever they decide to do something. Or someone will come with a plan ready to go, and they're having issues with wetlands or figuring out how they're going to go about really nasty beach or invasive species, and they just need another set of eyes on it, and we can assist in that way too. And then we'll take it a step further and actually put together the application and send it into NRCS and act as an agent throughout that process. We really kind of have to step out though once it gets to the point of getting a contractor involved and dealing with that end of the business, because conflict of interest law, I don't work on any state lands, but if somebody was working on a property that I helped facilitate the contract on, and then they got a state contract, it may look strange. So we don't go anywhere near that. And we encourage a forester to get involved as early as possible.
There's one more quick one here.
So NRCS reduces cost share when dealing with low levels of invasive. NRCS changes the way they go about invasive plants every other week, it seems. Right now, what we're seeing is with brush control 314, they won't even look at a if you're applying for brush management in a forested area, they won't look at that unless it fits within the footprint of a forestry practice. So it could be forest stand improvement, it could be mast release, anything down those lines. So you kind of have to have that in mind, that they're not really willing to invest in the heavy load of invasive species mitigation unless there's going to be either disturbance introduced in that area or some other work that improves that habitat.
Great, thanks, Pat. I think Mary Ann has some things to add.
Yeah, we thought we would take, I'm Mary Ann Piche, work for Mass Wildlife as a habitat biologist. I've worked under partnership with NRCS since 2008 under a formal partnership agreement, and cover the entire state with their general EQIP program and assisting in ways that Pat was talking about. That is still available to everybody. If you don't fall in the focal area that is on the map for the RCPP, there are still EQIP funds available for other types of projects. So we thought that we would highlight some stuff that's going on that's pretty exciting to me after having worked with NRCS for so many years and not seeing research necessarily happening on our private lands project sites. I was happy to see Jen talk about the fact that with the Foresters for the Birds RCPP, there's some follow-up going on there to see how species are responding to the management that's taking place there. So I just want to highlight a couple of things about NRCS that they actually do fund. They have a couple of different programs that fund research. And one of them is, I also wanted to remind people that we're still very entrenched in New England cottontail conservation, and NRCS does have specific money allocated for New England cottontail projects. And our most recent occurrences where I'm sort of working right now to promote management for them are in New Marlboro, Monterey, and on County Road in Great Barrington. NRCS does also have some programs that fund research on private and other lands as well. And one of those programs is called the Conservation Effects Assessment Program. And we had some folks out of the U.S. Forest Service, UMass, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and Antioch who are collaborating and applied for that funding through NRCS to look at the use of New England cottontail managed sites by birds, and which is really interesting to us because, you know, there's a lot of emphasis and focus on this one species and managing habitat for them. While we do know that that kind of management and that sort of single species approach is essential for New England cottontail, because as Pat mentioned, like ruffed grouse, they don't disperse very far. So we need to make sure we're managing in places where they currently occur. So, but we also want to see that those projects are benefiting other species as well. So these folks are going to be looking at birds in our New England cottontail managed sites. And they actually started yesterday. I got an email from them deploying recording devices in those sites. So they'll be looking this season at them. And in particular, they have an interest in whippoorwill and golden wing warbler, and hopefully gathering information that will help to expand best management practices for those species. Another program that NRCS offers for researchers or folks is called the Conservation Innovation Grants. And we currently have some researchers from SUNY ESF who have submitted an application for one of those grants. And they've been researching New England cottontail management in New York, and they want to expand and replicate their research in Massachusetts and some of the other states. So they've applied for one of those grants, and they'll be looking at birds under partnership with the University of New Hampshire, and they'll be doing camera traps for mammals, and they're also going to be looking at bats. And so tonight we thought we'd highlight, I reached out to a former student at the University of Connecticut, Dan Wright, who earned his master's degree from UConn in research, natural resources in the environment. And he did his research, his master's project on bats in New England cottontail managed sites or within New England cottontail focal area. So he actually has some data that we thought we would have him share with you this evening. Very briefly, we don't have a lot of time, but we may be able to plan for a longer presentation at some point in time. So he submitted a paper to the Journal of Forest Ecology and Management, which has been accepted. So we will hope to be able to read in detail about his research. So I want to turn it over to him so he has as much time as possible to talk about what he did for his project.
Thanks, Marianne. Yeah, I'll share my screen. Is that all set?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, I'm Dan Wright, and as Mary, I did my project and master's research on the response of insectivorous bats to silviculture treatments and how their activity changes as these regenerating stands continue to age, in this case, over a 13-year period. So for my research, I did my research in Northwest Connecticut and Southwest Massachusetts, which, as you probably know, is a predominantly forested region with not a lot of early successional habitat and a generally homogeneous landscape and low human development. And within this area, there's 9 species of bats that occur, 5 of which are state listed as endangered, and all of which are listed as species of greatest of conservation need. So a little bit of information about how bats operate in forested environments. They can broadly be placed into 3 categories based on their wing morphology and their echolocation characteristics, where the smaller species of bats that are pretty maneuverable can be classified as closed-based foragers, where they can maneuver and access prey within mature forest stands and like highly cluttered environments. And then there's edge-based foragers. They're kind of the medium-sized bats. And those are the ones foraging along forest edges and open field habitat. And then lastly, there's open space foragers, and these are kind of the large species that are fast flying and not as maneuverable and need those open spaces for capturing prey. And there's some overlap between where these species are found in the classifications, just kind of broad classifications. But for all 3 of these groups, there have been positive responses identified between the creation of early successional habitat and young forest for bats, because they use it as foraging and commuting habitat. But it's kind of a lack of research on how activity changes as these stands continue to age. So using the stands, so all the work that happened in New England for the New England cottontail and American woodcock with the creation of these early successional forests and young forest habitat, it's kind of a unique opportunity to study how insectivorous bats are responding to these habitat manipulations over a range of years. So treatments began in 2009, so we can look at sites from 2009 until today in a single geographic area, which is pretty great. So for my research, I tried to find out if bats were more active in the young forest versus canopy gaps in interior forests, how activity changed as the young forest continued to age, and what landscape stand and biological variables best explains the variation in bat activity in these stands. So just quickly to do that, located 26 regenerating forest stands for the study, and the ages of the treatment ages in these stands range from 2007 to 2018, with a minimum of 2 sites for each year. So a pretty good range of years and sites for each year. And then we also monitored in the adjacent interior forest. So for each of those treatment stands, we also monitored in mature or in naturally occurring canopy gaps in the adjacent forest, just to see if activity is higher, comparable in the adjacent forest stands. So to monitor, we used acoustic recording devices, the Peterson D500X acoustic recorders, and monitored each site for 2 consecutive nights, once in the pre-volant period and once in the post-volant period. And this was conducted in 2019 and 2020. And the pre-volant period is that period before young bats of the year are flying, and the post-volant is after the young bats of the year are flying. And we define that as pre-volant is May 1st to July 1st, and then post-volant was July 15th to September 1st. So that's good. And I also collected invertebrate samples while I was doing my acoustic monitoring to see how invertebrate biomass influenced activity in these stands. And the orders were dried and measured and identified to insect order. So, so just some quick results. This is I had enough data to support analysis for 4 bat species: the big brown, hoary bat, silver-haired, and eastern red bat. And the figure right here is showing the activity of these 4 species based on the treatment age and treatment type. So on the x-axis is the treatment age. So time since treatment 1 year to 13 years, and then the activity of these species in blue is the treatment sites and red is control sites. So for all 4 of these species, there was significantly higher activity in the treatment sites compared to the adjacent mature forest stands. And we also found significant variation between the treatment years. So kind of answering the first question, we then wanted to find out how like the activity changed as they continue to age, and then what variables influence the activity. So just going quickly through this last bit, basically broke down the next stage of the analysis into 3 different categories, like biologically relevant variables, including invertebrate biomass, temperature, and the time, the volant period, and then landscape characteristics around the sites. So like a 1 kilometer buffer around each of these regenerating forest stands kind of classified the landscape features to see if it had an effect on activity, and then characteristics within the forest stands. And for all 4 species, so again, the 4 species that we had enough data to support analysis on, the biologically relevant variables were much more influential on activity than both the landscape and stand characteristics. So the availability of invertebrate biomass, the nightly temperature, and the time of year that you monitor in played a much bigger role in the activity we observed than characteristics in the surrounding landscape, or even characteristics within the stand and the size of the stand. And an important thing to keep in mind when thinking about the results is that the region that we were conducting our research in is a heavily forested area without a lot of early successional habitat for bats. So the presence of prey, irrespective of the landscape characteristics, just seemed to be driving activity. And we don't know yet if that's specific to this heavily forested region or not. And lastly, for all forest species, activity was almost identical as time since treatment increased, where all 4 species, like as these sites continued to age, activity just went down because there's just clutter in the foraging space and they just can't access prey items and maneuver as easily. So indication for either retreatment or creation of new early successional habitat to support insectivorous bats. Running out of time, so I'm going to breeze through those. So, quick thank you to all the, this work was helpful or helped by all the private landowners and land trusts who allowed access to property, funding sources, and Marianne for helping me identify sites actually in the beginning of my study. And then my advisors and committee members for their brain power in helping this get underway. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Great, and there's one there, Dan, how far will bats fly for daily feeding?
Depends on the species, but they can generally fly low end 1 kilometer, high end they could fly a couple miles.
Great.
A pretty big range.
And if folks have additional questions, you can type them in and Dan can answer them by typing an answer to you as we go. But we've got a jam-packed schedule, so we're going to move on to our next presenter. We're happy to have Bob Rochelle from the New England Forestry Foundation join us and to talk a little bit about their exemplary forestry program. Bob?
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for giving me the chance to talk. Let me get this loaded. Here we go. So I'm going to do my talk in 3 parts. And Chris, thank you for volunteering to look at some of the questions. At the end of each of the 3, I'll stop and maybe we can do a question or 2 just to kind of give me a break here. And people might want to ask some clarifying questions, but I'll save some time at the end, hopefully 20 minutes or so, for questions. So we'll have a chance to get to your questions, but maybe we take a little break after each one and pause and look at a question or 2, and then, but I will move it on. So the 3 parts, I'm going to start by taking a regional global look at forest and climate change before we get down to the Massachusetts level. So NEF has been looking at region-wide what New England forests can do for climate change. And so I'd like to show you what we've been saying and what we've come up with and what it sounds like and looks like, and get your feedback on that. In the middle here, I've thought of a few provoking questions that we still need to answer. And if I have the time, I'll hone in on one of them. That's the leakage issue. But I'll present a few here. It's not all the questions that are out there, but there are a few of them that have popped up and we're trying to answer. And then towards the end, I'll get to the actual meat of this. We've come up with new exemplary forestry standards for Southern New England to match our Northern New England Acadian forest standards. And that will be the third part of this one. All this will, I think, make sense and stimulate you to ask some questions about those in the context of what we're saying about this regional perspective and look about what forests can do. So let's get started on the first part. I've given this presentation a number of times. You may have seen it. If you've gone on some of the webinars that have been happening for the last year, it keeps changing. I keep adding things. But we're the New England Forestry Foundation. We've been around for 77 years. We have over 150 properties. They're scattered through New England. And I just got this map today. It's the first time we've superimposed our parcels, our forest, with the forest types that we're talk about with our exemplary forestry standards. So you can see the spruce fir type, that the Acadian forest that we already had standards for the last several years. And now we're covering most of the rest of New England with our other standards. So that's what NEF does. You may remember 7 or 8 years ago, we came out with this report, The Path to Sustainability. So we started our work by doing some hard thinking about what were all the benefits that forests really gave to society. And then our intent was, which we followed, was to pick 1 or 2 of those and focus our resources on that issue. So we decided it was building buildings with wood, and how's that connected to climate change. And so we've been at that since this report has come out. And I think we're very happy that we selected those 2. It's played out, it's very topical, it's very important. So we felt we made the right choice. And now we've got quite a bit to reveal and to say about how that can help. So let's dig into this. We've got a big climate problem, and it's becoming more real every day. I saw today the EPA released its report that was held up for the last 3 or 4 years, and it says that climate is getting worse, and it's getting worse fast. What the specialists have now understand is that we have to reduce our emissions, but we can't just rely on that anymore. We actually have to take carbon out of the atmosphere in order to meet the climate goals on this. And that means we got to look at forest. We got to consider forest and other natural land on how to do this. So when you've seen graphs like this before, this is our problem. If we continue to emit the way we are, world global emissions will increase. And even if we meet the Paris Accord commitments to date, it merely levels out. We've got to do a lot better, and we've got to do a lot better really fast if we're going to stick to any of these 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius goals. You can see how fast those lines bend down, and that's going to require everything we can throw at this. Solar and wind. I see the offshore Vineyard Wind has been approved, and that's going through. Major first offshore wind. We need all that stuff. Electric vehicles. We're also going to need to think about what our forests can do. So that's why we at NEF paid our attention to that. Let's ask that question. What can the forest of New England do to solve this problem? Well, what is the problem? The gold in this chart is the energy emissions in New England wide up to about now. That dark brown black wedge there is how you'd have to pull those emissions down to 2050 in order to meet net zero, which is what many of the states in New England are committed to. Right, so that's where we got to get, which means this gray area here. We can't emit that. If we continue to do what we're doing today, we will emit it. We can't. So we have to find some way not to emit 2 gigatons of carbon. So how much of that gray area can forest meet? Let's look at it. Here's the region. This is a stocking chart in our region. Forest stocking chart reveals probably what you already know. Stocking's heavy down here in Massachusetts and southern New England. It's light up north. The land ownerships are very different in these two areas. So the large industrial TIMOs up north have been cutting pretty hard. Some of this is due to the forest type, but some of it's just due to the business plan that they have. So we've got low carbon up north and relatively good carbon stocking down south. So how do we deal with that? Other issues here. Most of the harvesting is being done up north. Most of the consumption happens down here. That's where most of the people are, most of the industry and businesses. So you would expect that. So we need to think about this regionally, where the wood is, where the harvests are, where the stocking is, where the people are, where the emissions are, and how difficult it's going to be for states like Massachusetts to meet their emissions goal. And they'll have to look elsewhere. Massachusetts can look to its own forest, but it will have to look elsewhere if it wants to offset and take carbon out of the atmosphere. Maybe we have a New England-wide partnership that we can pull together here. Back to that chart, just to refresh your memory on that. That's what we're dealing with here. So how does Massachusetts work with, for instance, Maine, to make something happen here for the benefit of global carbon? So what NEF had started is now playing out here. A number of years ago, we decided that as a nonprofit managing forest, we really needed to define what our forestry was all about, why we were doing it, how we did it, and what the results are. And we needed help. So we wanted to develop our standards for NEF properties. We did it in the Acadian forest. I presented, I think, to this group at times before. So these are the standards. This is a little bit more of a close-up of those standards. It identifies stocking goals. It identifies wildlife habitat creation goals, what the umbrella species are up north in the Acadian forest, marten and lynx. It identifies percentages of stands in size classes that will help you get to the right habitat for the target species. It says we should keep full stocking on our forests whenever we can do that and use silvicultural approaches that can help us do that. Improve the quality of timber, improve the stocking. This is what NEF has been doing. So now we had the guides, which was very helpful because then we could take the guides, hopefully improve our own management, but it allowed us to offer those guides to other landowners that wanted to replicate this. And then it allowed us to model, if we did practice these practices across the landscape, what would happen? What would be the climate effect if we were able to expand this and do these practices? You could use other practices. You could put other standards in there, but at least we had these and we had something to model and report on. So the question became, what if we used exemplary forestry across the New England landscape? What if we produced more wood because we were practicing better forestry? And what if we put some of that wood into tall wood buildings? Could we harvest, produce the wood, build buildings, and increase carbon at the same time? That was the question. And the answer became, yeah, that's possible. Here's what happens when you do that. Here's what would happen in New England if we could spread exemplary forestry across the landscape and build with buildings. Okay, at the bottom here is if you put it into enough buildings that are going to be built over the next 30 years, you get a carbon benefit at the bottom. That's the wood stored in the buildings. The gray wedge at the bottom is what you've offset as far as steel and concrete. You do not get those emissions if you do that. The next band is what if you stopped losing forest land? There's a benefit in that too. So these are all important. It's a system we're looking at. But the big wedge from C to D is practicing better forestry. It's bigger than all the other ones. And we can do this. We can change our practices and do better. Most of that from C to D, most of that benefit is happening up in Maine. Most of it comes from increasing the stocking on understocked forests. Let's be clear, we're in Massachusetts. There is a benefit from, and we can show you that, from practicing this kind of forestry in Massachusetts, but it's nowhere near as big volume-wise as what happens in Maine. And of course, most of the buildings that are going to be built are going to be built in Boston and Connecticut and Hartford and places like that. So you pick up a lot of the A, B, and C in New England. But back to forestry changes happens a lot in New England. But we need to then look at New England. We didn't have the standards for New England. The result of this, if we did that, that wedge is taken, and now you see the wedge you just looked at previously, that's the green wedge here. That amounts to 30% of all the needed emissions reductions in New England over 30 years. That's a big number. It deserves thought, it deserves attention, it deserves more study and thought about how we can pull this off. That could be very important for climate change. The focus is now on forest and forestry and how we do this. This is the program. And this is, that's the wedge I just showed you. You end forest conversion, you practice exemplary forestry, you put the wooden buildings, you get a 30% solution. I want to say a little bit more about that exemplary forestry circle. We're foresters. When we think about exemplary forestry, we also think about the forest that we won't manage at all. And NEF decides to leave some forests alone. We promote that. We want that to happen. Elsewhere in the landscape, we do it on our own properties. We're going to do it more. We're talking with Northeast Wilderness Trust about partnerships to do more on our own property. So that's included in doing better forestry and setting some of the land aside. Altogether, it's a 30% solution. I put it on its own slide. This is big stuff, you know, and we're starting to get movement on this. We're starting to get the commissioners in each state talking about it. We're starting to get better data on this and other studies that are replicating what we're talking about here. So it's beginning to move forward. We at NEF are doing this work through a new focus in a new area that we put together. It's called our Exemplary Forestry Center. It's not a building, it's bringing all our programs together, our science, our conservation tools, our outreach, our communications, and eventually policy. We'll do some policy now, there'll be more. So you put all these together, that this is how we drive our programs. These are different programs we have that are all pushing us towards that 30% solution. You've heard about some of them before. We've launched the first pool timber income fund that allows small private family owners to pool together their timber, get paid each year, get a tax deduction, their property is protected forever. That fund is growing for us. We're launching an exemplary forestry investment fund that will be open to private investors that would like a small return on their property of 2 to 5%. And we think there's a lot of money out there globally that could flow in and allow us to buy some of the big properties in Maine when they go up for sale. We're talking about exemplary forestry standards. We've got to figure out a way to verify that other people are practicing our standards. Maybe it's a registry, we're not sure yet. We're doing wildlife funding right now through an RCPP program in Maine. We're doing a lot of landowner outreach and expanding that work. And of course, we've had our Build It With Wood programs, and now our Forest to Cities is our major outreach program that's bringing people together, from loggers to landowners to architects and to people that are living in affordable housing. So that's how to pull that together. We're trying to figure out how to do this fast. This is how it works. This is the year of science for us. We've got a lot of science coming online here, including the Southern New England standards. Next year, probably most of our work, there's a lot of overlap here, but most of our work will be outreach and communications. I'm doing some of it right now, talking to you all, but we're doing it this year. Next year, we'll be doing a lot more of that. Then hopefully, if things go right, we turn to policy in 2023, where there's some major policy push. We're successful, and then we begin the landowner outreach and implementation. The money starts flowing to help landowners practice better forestry and helping with climate change. And then we keep going after that. So let me stop here. That's my first part. So Chris, let me pause for a moment and see if there are any questions out there. And I can answer them at this point before I move on to my provoking questions.
Yes, there's a question about the effects of the pandemic on housing. If people are uncomfortable living in high density housing, does that affect, building of mass timber buildings? And if so, how long does that effect last?
So the people are uncomfortable in high density housing?
Well, if people are, the pandemic has forced people to think
Oh.
about it. Maybe I don't want to live in
Yeah.
the city anymore.
Pandemic related. Yeah, that throws a little bit of monkey wrench in here. Are people really going to continue to leave urban areas and flow out here I'm talking to you from Littleton. This is a good place for people to get out of the city. So I don't know, is it short term or long term? My bet is that it kind of all squares itself out. Hopefully we get out of this pandemic situation and things go a lot back to normal and there's not that much of a drift out of cities. Other people feel the same way. I just heard today the CDC if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask anymore anywhere. So things seem to be changing, maybe getting back to normal, but that could be a problem. And a problem for all of us. If people from urban areas are moving out here, they're going to want to live somewhere and they'll build houses and take down forests.
Right. So it's the only active question we had at the moment.
Fine, good. Give me a little bit of a pause. I'm just going to keep plowing forward here. All right.
Here's one more that just came in.
All right, I'm going to keep going back.
It says, imagine a high-graded, degraded forest that was poorly stocked. You regenerate it, it comes back beautifully with natural regeneration. Stocking with quality trees will require early forest tending, and then timber stand improvement to pick the best trees and grow them faster. How do you get foresters to promote more timber stand improvement on our landscape and landowners to do that?
Yeah. Well, it's nice to have some funding to do that. And we just heard about that earlier in this session. I was surprised that there were so many different funding sources available. And I made a little note that we at NEF, we've got properties. We need to look at that and help that. So, part of it is, is the funding available? The other part, I've been doing this a long time. We all know that reaching out to landowners and communicating with them is not easy. It's hard. They change. Family situations change. We haven't made really that great strides, even though we've been trying really hard. That's why you see on this slide here, in 2022, outreach and communications. NEF has been working at this in pilot programs for the last 8 years, and we've made some real strides. We've increased our ability to communicate and get people to response by over 13%, which is actually quite a bit. And we're beginning to expand our programs and hopefully someday be throughout New England. So 215,000 landowners, we're going to have to get to all of them. We're going to have to be real better at doing it. And boy, for the presentations I saw today, I think we're making a lot of progress. I think back 20, 30 years ago, these are good publications, good outreach tools, tremendous graphics. I think we're in a pretty good position to make a big push here.
Right.
All right, I'll slip into the next one to keep your juices flowing here a little bit. So these are some of the questions that you've heard of them, and we're dealing with them and thinking about them carefully. I'll focus on one of them, which is that leakage question, but let me mention the other ones and say a few words about them. So NEF is saying there's a 30% solution by managing forest land, and there are other folks out there that are saying, wouldn't it be better? Wouldn't you actually get a better result by just leaving it alone and never harvesting it again? And you've heard the word proforestation, probably those that comes under that rubric. Good question. I think that should be asked and answered, of course. And we've looked into it, and our answer is, in most cases, no, that doesn't work. If you look at this from a systems approach and you consider that we need wood products, then management actually produces a better climate change. And I've had colleagues that have said, if there wasn't any people and no need for wood products on the planet, we would definitely leave it all alone. But of course, we probably wouldn't have a climate problem if we wouldn't have any people. So given that people there's going to be another 2-3 billion people on the planet in the next 30 years, and they all have to live somewhere, and they're all going to have to build buildings for them. So we've got to do something and provide those products for people. And when you put that into the equation, our forests are a good place to get them. Now, and I'll say more about this later, this is helpful to ask the question because there are some forest stands that are stocked and have biological values to them that we should not harvest anymore. And we know that. We're beginning to see which ones, and now we're trying to figure out, where's the cutoff line? If you just think about climate change, if you have a really old growth forest, it's better to leave it alone. But what if it's 120 years old or 130? Or that's what we're beginning to look at and try to figure out where that line is, and how would you treat some of those stands if they were close to the line to ensure that they're doing good for the climate. So that's all I'll say there. Happy to have a whole nother 2 hours to talk about that, but Chris, you might want to schedule it sometime because it's a major issue. The other one is, you might have heard recently, there's been big articles in the Boston Globe and before that nationally from ProPublica about looking at carbon trading programs and creating quite a bit of stir over this thing. The Globe had an article about Mass Audubon and its carbon trading, but there's action going on in other places and other media outlets. This is a pretty big issue right now this week. They attack and make a big case of the additionality argument that, Mass Audubon wouldn't have harvested trees anyway. So what did we gain by paying them to not harvest them? I'm not going to get into that. I think it's not a great argument for a number of reasons, but that's another topic. But what they're not talking about too much, but they do mention it in some of these articles, is the leakage issue. And I'll get to that. I have a few slides on that one. So I will dig into that a little bit. The next question is, so what's the right policy vehicle to do this if we want this 30%? Is it setting something up where Massachusetts pays Maine landowners? Or is it a federal program that does it? Or is it Amazon and British Petroleum buying private carbon credits? How do you work this out? And also, if we're going to pass incentives, public incentives, money to landowners, people are going to ask us, you need to prove that what we're paying you actually results in climate change, real climate change. This is back to these articles we're seeing. We want proof of this. So we're working really hard to give proof. And we think we can show that if you practice according to these standards, you will get a climate benefit. And we're going to have to show that, whether it's NEF standards or something else, you're not going to get paid unless they know they're going to get something for the money. The last issue I have here is, it's the big one. Wildlands and woodlands, been a partner on that for a long time. Now it's wildlands and woodlands and the farming community together. Can we form partnerships? Can the wilderness folks and the forestry folks get together with the farm community? And can we bridge the gap to urban areas, the people that live and need affordable housing? Can we form a partnership and actually find a way to use our forest in New England in the right way to help for climate change? There seems to be benefits for everybody here if we do it all together. If we fight against each other, we'll probably get nothing at the end. So we've been working really hard to bridge those, cross those bridges and get people together in a partnership. So let me say a few things about the leakage problem. Okay. And a lot of this comes from Alec Giffen, who's on our staff, a former state forester in Maine. He's put this together. The question that comes up is, how do you increase carbon in the forest so that it really makes a real difference in the atmosphere? And our carbon trading programs, they haven't really talked a lot about this, but if you protect 100 acres of forest land and claim you've protected the carbon on it, the question is, where does that harvest go? If it was going to be harvested, isn't it going to be harvested somewhere else? That's called leakage. You go down the road or into Maine or into the Amazon or Alabama, somewhere maybe but the wood gets harvested because you haven't changed the demand for the wood products. And that's not within our direct power to do that. So protecting a piece of land, you got to deal with the leakage issue. So it doesn't change what the atmosphere sees if you just move the leakage to somewhere else. Another article came out today about a European company starting off a startup, and it's going to analyze these carbon trading schemes and report back. And it's done some original work, and it found like 40% of all the trades that it looked at just displaced it next door. So the cutting just went on next door. I don't know how valid all that is, but that's what I read today. So it's a big issue. We think we can solve that issue. Forestry can solve that issue. We looked at our own properties, and over decades, we can show that we've been able to harvest a good deal of wood and increase the stocking on the property. We also have information about the wildlife habitat improvements on the property. So we think we can do this. That's part of exemplary forestry. So it gets rid of the leakage problem. And it does that by making forests more productive. That's what foresters can do. That's what we were trained to do. Put us in a stand, let us manage the stand according to sustainable forestry principles, and we'll make the forest more productive in products per acre. It's like telling a farmer, you're producing 3 acres now. Would you like 3 bushels an acre now? Would you like to produce 5? Yeah, that would be great. Well, we can do that in forests. So let us do it. Let us practice better forestry across the landscape, and we'll have an effect on this leakage problem. So we've looked at this. We've done some analysis of this. We projected what exemplary forestry can do over time. All the numbers work out. We can back it up with what we're seeing here. This is what happens to carbon in the forest in a typical Maine forest that's been harvested and starts with low stocking. If you apply exemplary forestry practices, the stocking goes up. That's great for climate. We're still harvesting some in here, right? And so we're still producing products. We've launched a major study with the University of Maine with some of the large landowners in Maine to look at this more closely and to be able to tell them at the end of the study, this is the kind of silviculture you practice, this is the amount of harvest you can get, and this is how much you'd have to be paid in order to make the transition, because that's what they're interested in. So this is Alec, former state forester in Maine. This is already being done at places in Maine. We've got the track record. We can show that it's being done. Why would other large industrial owners or TIMOs do this? It's possible to do it. It's not going to happen unless something changes. And this is Alec's slide. Why will it succeed? They'll have to be profitable. In order to make that transition, they have to do it profitably, which means we need to find a connection to the climate benefit on that. So conclusion, it's possible to increase stocking and maintain harvest. Yep, we can do it. And we can implement at a scale, but it will require financing this and matching the financing with the desired outcome. That's what why we're talking about perhaps carbon trading schemes. And that's why the articles that are out hammering carbon trading schemes are so troublesome to see this week. But we'll have to get through that. This ends my second part. And Chris, I think I'm still pretty much online here. If there's one question, I'll take it, and then I should jump right into my last section on Southern New England standards.
Yeah, so you said that most of the benefit you could see from this would be in Maine, largely because of low stocking. Is that, what did they do wrong? Is that just simply aggressively harvesting, and by doing less aggressive harvesting, that's how you get that benefit?
Yeah, in Maine, what's happened over time is, sort of a downward cycle, and we're not blaming anybody. It comes into financial things. First of all, your products begin to be oriented towards pulpwood, which means, small trees, right? So You buy a piece of property, you have to support the price that you bought the property for. A lot of these are 10, 12, 15-year returns. So how do you return money to your investors quickly if you bought a piece of property that only has 15 cords an acre and the trees are 35 years old? You got to cut, and they keep cutting. So the trees are always pulpwood stands. They're always young stands. They just keep repeating and repeating. We need to help them get out of that cycle. In order to get out of the cycle, they kind of like to grow their forests longer into saw timber size because they get more money out of it, but they can't wait 20 or 30 years to do that without some sort of cash flow. And we can provide them with that cash flow. So change your forestry practices. How much will it cost for us to incentivize you to do that? And will it be worthwhile for climate change and a good investment of climate money in order to pay a Maine landowner, for instance, to do that? We think it's going to be a great deal, and we need to show the numbers.
Great.
Okay, that's probably a pretty good segue into the next thing. I was answering that from a Maine perspective, but then the question becomes, so what about Southern New England? You know, what about practicing good forestry in Southern New England? How does that tie into this big scheme New England wide of climate change and benefits? So let's dig into that. So we did the Acadian forestry standards several years ago. We wanted to follow them right up with the Southern New England standards, but we got waylaid in other things. It's okay. We paid attention to the right things, but we're finally getting to them. And they became a little bit difficult. I'll mention a few of those. So these are the types. You can see the northern hardwood spruce fir, that's the Acadian type. We got those standards. We needed to fill in the gap for the rest of New England. So we did. We have it, like we did in the Acadian forest, we have an advisory committee we've been working with, and they've hung on a little bit longer than they thought they needed to, but we're about ready to do that. So we're giving them sort of the final draft and looking for their approval on this. It's very similar to the Acadian standards. There's some significant differences. It improves the stand over time. There's targets for size class distributions that are connected to needs of wildlife and umbrella species. We heard some things today about, New England cottontail and other species, bats and birds that need early successional species. So we try to account for that, but how much of your woodlot, how much of the landscape should be in those different size classes? We use the scientific data, ecological data to come up with numbers for that. And as I just said, these are forests that will continue to grow and harvest wood at about 0.5 cord per acre per year or more. And if you treat them right, they can do it. If you don't, they're not going to do that well. It's very important in a climate emergency that we're really, really good at our management and can make our forests very productive. So here are some of the key differences between Acadian and Southern New England. The wildlife species are different. This was tough for us. It was a lot easier up north, to pick a couple of species. Down here, it became immediately much more complex, but we had good help from the experts. So we made it a little bit more complicated, but we had to. So we got forest interior, early successional, and edge species. I like the native bumblebees and the edge species. I have no idea what that means, but I'm willing to learn more about that. These are the species that we're shooting for, and the standards should provide for these species if they're followed. The stand conditions. This is a big issue with climate change. And this is one of the things we got to deal with. We've got heavily stocked stands in New England. It's not just a matter of let's just let them grow and practice different forestry and increase the stocking. We already have large, heavily stocked stands. What happens to climate mitigation in 30 years if we start going into those heavily stocked stands and doing heavy shelter wood cuts and removing a lot of the material? That's a pro-forestation question. It's a legitimate one. And as the more we looked into it, the more, this is sort of complicated. We don't have the answer yet, but we're gonna have our answer pretty soon. But it's not cut and dry. Some of these heavily stocked stands, you can't harvest them really heavy and expect to get a climate benefit in 30 years even if the wood is going into products. You know, some of these just do not work. So there are going to be some of these stands that we'll have to treat very differently. You know, you can't use a heavy shelter wood, but there are other methods we have, expanding gap or regular shelter woods, selection system, you know, they can be worked, but there will likely be a cutoff where the stand is more valuable in the carbon that it's currently storing and the benefit for wildlife biodiversity to just leave it alone. So we're open to that. We're looking at the numbers. Stay tuned. We'll tell you what we have, and we're open to criticism if you think we got it wrong, but we'll be making those, or at least our opinion on those, available to people shortly, meaning in the next couple of months. So that's sort of the end of my talking at you. I'd love to take questions if we have time. Please be in contact with me. This next slide is a little bit better on how to reach me, and would love to hear from anybody via email or just give me a call. Chris, if you have any questions and can tee me up, I'd be happy to do that in whatever time I have left.
Yeah. So there's a question about figuring out the human and technological aspects of making logging and forestry economically and financially viable. Yeah, you need a particularly sophisticated workforce to do this. So how does that happen and get paid for?
Yeah, there's a whole infrastructure problem. You know, I was a consulting forester in here 30 years ago, in this region 30 years ago, and all the people I was selling timber to, there's only one or two left. You know, we used to do a showing and get 12 or 15 people showing up, and that's changed dramatically. So there's no way to sugarcoat that one. You know, we've got some problems there. I don't know how to solve it directly, but I think I think this is our chance, and maybe our last chance. If we can connect ourselves to climate change and be really helpful in that issue, will be important. This sector of forestry and logging will be important enough to invest in. And hopefully we'll all make enough money to make a living, but the payments for the public services that we have not been paid for yet will begin to be paid for. And hopefully that will be a boom to industry, and you'll see small sawmills opening back up. You know, it's a tough one. That's my hope. But this is as much as I think NEF can do at the moment for that. Hopefully other people can work on other ends of it.
And there's a question about, you know, in terms of the carbon of building products, is there a way to reuse construction material? Is that a possible contributor?
Yeah, that's one of the big advantages in this cross-laminated timber and building buildings. You know, they're like erector sets, and they can, number one, if you need to change the building, and that happens often where the buildings just don't fit the use anymore in 30 years. Businesses have changed and needs change. You can alter them by removing walls and putting in new ones, or adding on top of it with other wood floors, things like that. It's much easier than steel and concrete to alter them. And at the end of the building's life, they basically can be taken apart and used somewhere else. The panel is still going to be a panel, and it could be used in another building. And, you know, possibly at the end of the life, you know, maybe they could be burned for electricity at the end of the life to get something out of them, but they don't have to go into a landfill like steel and concrete. It's kind of tough to recycle those materials. Not impossible. They're doing as much as they can, but it's harder.
Any other questions for Bob? That's all the questions that have been submitted so far. So, Bob, with these southern New England exemplary forestry, you'll be undertaking that on your properties down in Massachusetts and southern New England?
Yeah, I mean, that's an internal question. Like we keep on, haven't we been practicing this, Bob? Yeah, I think we have, because I like what I see on the ground, and I think it matches up. But we never codified them. You know, And this is helping us talk to the consulting foresters that we hire to manage our lands, as well as being able to model it and say these things to you today, that if we did this across the landscape, this would be the benefit for them. So we're talking about it today. We're eager at NEF to see if our management in the past and currently matches up with these standards. And if they don't, we need to make some changes. One of the things that we know we haven't done really well is to think about each of our parcels in a landscape perspective, particularly for wildlife. Like the bat presentation. He was doing the studies and it sounded like most of that there were not much early successional there, right? That's pretty, we know that. So one of our properties that sits in the middle of a sea of other private landowners, what is the context for wildlife on a regional basis? And how should we be managing, we're a nonprofit public organization for the public service. How should we be managing our property depends upon what's happening around us. And, we historically have not given that much thought to that. We're going to start doing that.
Great. And you mentioned the pooled timber income fund. That's an interesting project. I don't know how many people are really familiar with that. Do you want to take a minute or two and just describe that?
Yeah, we started to think about doing this when a landowner who was an elderly woman whose husband really liked NEF and decided that he wanted to leave their 100-acre woodlot in, I think it was New Hampshire, to NEF. But he passed away. And so she got in touch with us and said, I know that's where the property is going to go eventually, but I need to go to California and move in with my sister. And I can't afford to give you the property now. But I need some income, and I'm not a forester. He dealt with that. And so we started to think about how we could help her. And one way is just to, kind of do a one-off annuity for her. And we put some money in the bank and she gets it for the rest of her life. That's one way to do it. But the other way is that led us to the pooled timber income fund. What she could put her timber into the fund, and we would manage her timber and everyone else's according to exemplary forestry standards. And she'd get a check every year based upon the number of shares she had that was based upon her timber that she put in. At the same time, she immediately gets a tax advantage because she donated something to a nonprofit. And at the end of her life, the property becomes one of NEF's one of NEF's community forests. So it's protected forever. So that combination of needs is not every landowner will want to get into this pooled timber income fund, but we found there's a segment of them that this is attractive and helpful to them. And it helps us spread exemplary forestry. It helps us protect land forever. So it's working out pretty good. The other interesting aspect is we didn't know this, but people are now coming to us saying, I don't have any forest land, but I've got some money. Could I make a donation and would you give me some shares and then go out and buy some land with the money I gave you? It's like, oh, all right. Yeah, we can do that. That fits. So that may be more of what the fund turns out to be than the actual land going in it, if there are enough investors out there that want to do this.
And then finally, there was a question about, the additionality and leakage criticisms that ProPublica and Globe Republican use their article. So is there a response to that you have?
Well, our response was to get in touch with Mass Audubon, one of our partners that we owe some favors to. They've helped us out in the past, and say, what can we do? How can we support you? We don't think this is fair, but you give us the lead. Tell us, we're ready. We know what you want us to say and how to say it and where to say it. And I think they're working through this issue. And sometimes it's better to let things lie, and let it play itself out. So we don't want to make any mistakes here, but we have a counter argument, at least at NEF. We've talked about this quite a bit internally. We don't think this is fair. It's kind of a strange analysis that it says in some of this critique, well, this is a nonprofit. They're getting the money. for the carbon credits. And yeah, they could go out and protect other land, but this doesn't seem like it works. Well, that's the whole point. You know, it's a nonprofit. When money comes in the door, whether it's NEF or Mass Audubon, we spend it on a public service. It's either to buy more land, improve the habitat on the land, help people recreate on the land, or educate, and whatever we do, that's our mission. So it's going to a good place. And so for me, it's like, so you're taking money from an oil company in California and you're giving it to Mass Audubon, who's protecting land here in Massachusetts. I don't have a problem with that, but you know, so that would that's kind of the start of our argument on that one.
Great. Well, thanks so much. This has been really informative, Bob. I really
This
appreciate
was
your
fun.
Time.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to me. I could go for a long time on this stuff. So call me or email me and tell me what your thoughts are. We're still kicking this stuff around, and it's changing rapidly. Let's put it that way.
Great. Well, thanks again. We have just a few more things left to discuss. I'm going to share my screen. Thanks very much to all of our panelists, but a few more things that we want to talk about MFA related. Just a very quick, brief legislative update. So, you know, there's a lot of bills out there that attack forest management, that attack modern wood heating. There's bills from the concrete industry attacking mass timber and wood construction. There's bills that, again, want to prevent forest management, you know, on state lands and make it difficult elsewhere. So we're, you know, want to push back on all those bills as we have, you know, in the past. The current situation is, you know, we listed a lot of the bills we were concerned about in the forest update in February. Those all had temporary bill numbers. So they now have permanent bill numbers that have been assigned to committees, and those hearings have actually started on these bills. And it's hard to say when these forest-related bills will come up. They will typically group them all together into one hearing. These hearings are being done virtually. You know, generally we only get 7 to 10 days advance notice of these hearings, so it's a little bit of a scramble when they occur. So, and it's not clear if it's going to happen this spring or if they'll be pushed off till the fall. Last year there were, you know, historically all the bills were heard in the spring. However, last year we had last session we had bills being heard in the fall for the first time. So those are all things we'll monitor. You know, we'll relist these in the June forest update with their new bill numbers, and you can look and see if your legislator is a co-sponsor of one of these. You know, that would certainly be a concern if they were, and we encourage you to reach out to your legislator and share your experience, invite them to come see your forest land or your project. And then, you know, we have targeted outreach to legislators on, you know, the committees that are hearing these bills, and we'll continue to flag those for members in those districts and ask you to make some outreach. And MFA on its own is we've been meeting with legislators basically throughout the first part of this session here. Key legislators on committees and others, and new folks. And we're having, you know, we're sharing our perspective. We're sharing some of the science behind what we do, and we're getting pretty good feedback about that. So we're hopefully opening some eyes and helping people understand the complexity of these issues and the science behind them. So we'll keep you up to date as we go through. A couple other things I wanted to mention. Forestrysuppliers.com, which I think a lot of people buy foresters buy their supplies from, whether it's marking paint or other things. We have a membership benefit that I don't think a lot of people know about, but you receive a 7% discount on anything you buy from forestry suppliers. So the way to do that is use the code KMA at checkout. We'll put this in the forest update as well, but if you're a member of MFA, make sure to get that discount if you're ordering anything from forestry suppliers. I also want to plug the Howard F. Mason Forester of the Year Award. So, you know, this is named after Howard Mason, who's a legendary forester who was well known, passed away But it's an award that's presented at the annual meeting to the Forester of the Year. We have another one of these awards, the Cook Award, which goes to the Wood Producer of the Year. We've been receiving, a lot of nominations for the Cook Award. We've gotten very few over the last couple of years for the Mason Award. So we're hoping that changes. So the nominations are being accepted right now. You can find it on our website on the Foresters Council page. You can either fill out a form online for a nomination, or you can download a form, fill it out on paper, and mail it in to us. They're due August 1st. So start thinking about that. Again, we're getting, one nomination a year. So we'd like to get a nice big pool that the Foresters Council can pick from to recognize, someone who's really doing a great job out in the woods and deserves some recognition. So, we had Link Fish in 2019 was recognized, and Joe Perry last year, as was mentioned earlier in this webinar. I know people have been asking questions about credits. The way that that's going to happen is we used Eventbrite so we could ask a question about credits if you needed them. So that's how we collect that information, and then I will email you out a certificate, and that will happen within the next week. If you need it, or for whatever reason would prefer it to be mailed to you, paper mail, I can do that as well. You're welcome to contact me, and we can go from there. And that's brings us just about to the end of our presentation. So let me turn things over to Mark Mueller if he just wants to give a brief ending here.
All right, thank you, Chris. Thanks everyone for attending, and thank you for all our panelists for all the work you've done, and thank you, Chris, for setting this whole thing up. And hope everyone had a good time, and have a great evening. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Here's my contact information if you have any questions about the credits or anything else that came up on the webinar. Thanks so much.
2 hours. You don't get any credits. I get this to go to that.